Once upon a time, there lived a young boy whose mother was a police officer. His name was Nonso, and his mother was greatly feared by the people around. No one dared to cross her path or even call her son out for who he truly was, an unrepentant thief whose mother spared no opportunity to shield him from the consequences of his actions, even if it meant silencing the truth with fear and authority. Nonso, despite his innocent looks, had fingers that were quicker than most eyes could follow. He feared no one and stole wherever he went, assured of his mother's unwavering protection. One Sunday, Nonso was caught stealing from the offering box in church. A young usher caught him trying to force open the offering box behind the altar. He was dragged to the front of the church and humiliated before the entire congregation. Just as he sat there, feeling so humiliated, his mother marched into the church in her police uniform, her rage boiling over as she caught sight of her son being castigated by the pastor of the church. Without waiting for an explanation, Inspector Nonye stormed down the aisle, her boots pounding against the tiled floor as she yelled out angrily at the pastor. "How dare you!" she thundered, pointing a finger at the pastor. "Who gave you the right to embarrass my son in your church?" she asked, and the pastor tried to explain, but Nonye snapped at the pastor angrily. "Is this how you treat a child? Drag him before the whole church like a criminal? You should be ashamed of yourselves," she said to the pastor as she reached out for her son's arm, yanking him up from the ground. "To hell with you and your stupid church, you bunch of hypocrites," she said as she warned everyone present never to talk about her son. "If any one of you breathes a word of this to anyone, I will personally see to it that you regret it," she said as she marched out of the church, dragging her son Nonso behind her. A few minutes later, they arrived home and Nonye did nothing to address the issue. Her son Nonso casually walked into his room like nothing had happened. He even whistled as he kicked off his shoes and threw himself onto the bed, pulling out a few crumpled notes that he had managed to slip into his pocket before he was caught. Nonye sat in the living room angry, not because of the theft, but because of the disrespect that she felt from the church. "Nonsense people! They think they can touch my only child and go free," she said to herself as a call came into her phone from the station. A notorious killer was now on the loose, and her superiors needed her to return to the station as soon as possible. Nonye bolted out of the house without saying a word. Nonso sat in his room contemplating on how he could get some money for himself. He sat there thinking, when suddenly he heard their neighbor Mama Chinyere complaining about how fast her drum of water finished. Nonso peeped from the window and caught sight of Mama Chinyere, who was now heading to the nearby stream to fetch some water. Nonso saw this as an opportunity to gain access into her house. He heard that Mama Chinyere had some money in her house, so Nonso decided to get it. As soon as Mama Chinyere disappeared down the bend of the street, Nonso grabbed his slippers and made his way out through the back door. His movements were quiet, calculated. This wasn't the first time he was slipping into a house that wasn't his. He tiptoed across the backyard and leapt over the short fence, making his way through the window of Mama Chinyere's house. Nonso slipped into the house, landing softly in the small kitchen. The house was completely silent, so he moved quickly to her bedroom. It didn't take long for his sharp eyes to find the wooden box under her bed. Inside were some wrappers, a few church envelopes and some money, wrapped tightly with a rubber band. Nonso's eyes widened in excitement. "Jackpot," he said to himself with a wicked grin on his face. He stuffed the money into his pocket and made his way towards the window to climb out. Nonso slipped out of the window and returned home just in time to avoid being seen. Mama Chinyere returned from the stream to find her savings gone. She collapsed to the floor, weeping bitterly. "My husband's burial money. God have mercy. Nonso, I know you took it. Please return it," she said as she went from house to house, begging, crying, accusing, but no one dared to confront Nonso or his mother. Everyone knew how his mother, Inspector Nonye, handled such things with absolute levity and threats. So, Nonso got away once again, leaving the poor widow to suffer in her grief, weeping and wishing that her husband was alive. The next morning, Nonso decided to buy some items with the stolen money. He took a stroll down the busy expressway, weaving his way through honking cars and angry bus conductors, when suddenly he saw it. A silver car was stuck in traffic, its windows rolled down, and sitting on the passenger seat was a black designer handbag with zippers. No one was inside, as the driver had stepped out of the car to buy some corn. Nonso's heart raced as he set his mind on stealing the bag. Without thinking twice, he slid his hand into the car and snatched the bag from the window. Nonso ran as fast as his legs could carry him, like one who was being chased by the devil himself. He arrived their home, all sweaty and breathless, as he locked himself in his bedroom and tossed the bag on the bed. Eager to see the contents of the bag, Nonso unzipped the bag and took a look inside. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. Then he froze as his eyes caught sight of something that he never expected. Inside the bag was a human head, a woman's head. Her eyes were open, but her face was pale, with blood crusted around her neck like a collar. Nonso screamed out in terror, a high-pitched, blood-curdling scream that echoed through the house. His mother Nonye, who had just returned from the station, busted into his room with her gun in her hand. "What is it? What happened?" she asked Nonso, who stood there panting as he pointed at the strange bag on his bed, shivering and unable to speak. Nonye walked over cautiously as she looked inside, her eyes wide in disbelief as she staggered back in terror. "Blood of Jesus!" she said, doing the mark of the cross. "What is this?" she asked her son Nonso, who stood there frozen and unable to speak. Nonye had to do something about the head before it was too late. She summoned all the courage she could muster, grabbed the bag with trembling hands, and zipped it shut with a force that made her flinch. Without wasting another second, Nonye threw on her police jacket and stormed out of the house with the bag in her hand. She didn't wait for an explanation. She didn't ask any more questions. All she knew was that whatever was in that bag was evil, and it needed to be far away from her home. Nonye drove to the outskirts of town, far beyond the expressway, towards the abandoned farmland people rarely visited. The air was quiet, far too quiet, that even the crickets seemed to hold their breath. Nonye parked her car by the side of the road as she grabbed the bag and ran into the bushes, pushing away branches and thorns. Her heart pounded like a war drum as she approached the deepest part of the forest. She dug a shallow pit with her hands and dropped the bag into the pit, covering it quickly as she made her way out of the forest terrified. Nonye drove away like her life depended on it. She arrived home a few hours later to find her son Nonso unconscious on the floor. His stomach had grown profusely like a pregnant woman due for delivery. Nonye quickly rushed him to the hospital, but the doctors had no idea what the problem could be. "He's perfectly fine from our observation," they said to Nonye, who asked if they were mad to give such a careless response. "How can he be perfectly fine with his stomach that looks like it's about to burst? Are you people blind?" Nonye snapped, pacing the hospital corridor like a lioness whose cub was under attack. The doctors exchanged nervous glances. "Madam, we've run every test, blood work scans. There's nothing medically wrong with your son." Nonye knew deep down that this was not a medical condition. However, she found it hard to come to terms with the fact that her son might be under a curse. The handbag was no ordinary one, and Nonye was so convinced that he had a hand in what was happening to her son. She quickly took her son out of the hospital and back home. Nonso was still unconscious, and his stomach continued to grow at a very terrifying rate. Nonye made some phone calls, and a prophetess was recommended to her by one of her old colleagues. "This woman sees things, so," the colleague whispered over the phone. "She doesn't talk too much, but if there's anyone who can handle spiritual cases, it's her." Without hesitation, Nonye called the prophetess and pleaded with her to come to her house. "I'll pay anything. Please, my son is dying," Nonye pleaded with the prophetess, who came to her house immediately. As soon as she stepped her foot inside the house, her mood changed. She didn't greet or smile as Nonye took her to her son's room and pleaded with her to save his life. "Please help us. Something terrible is happening to him." But the prophetess raised a hand to stop her from talking. Her eyes had fallen on Nonso, who was lying still on his bed, his stomach swollen beyond imagination. The prophetess began to shiver as she pointed at Nonso looking so terrified. She turned to leave, and Nonye rushed after her, grabbing the edge of her dress as she pleaded for her not to leave. "Please, prophetess, I beg you in the name of God, don't leave. Help my son," she cried, her voice breaking. But the prophetess shook her head violently, her lips quivering. "I can't help him," she whispered. "I can't even stay in this house." "What do you mean? You're a woman of God," Nonye shouted, grabbing her by the shoulders. "You come highly recommended. Why then won't you want to help us?" The prophetess looked her in the eyes and revealed that this was bigger than her. "I have seen so many things in life, but this one, I have never seen anything like it before." Her eyes glanced at Nonso, who lay there unaware of what was going on. "He is marked," she said in a trembling voice. "Marked by something older than curses." Nonye staggered back, her heart trembling as the word marked echoed repeatedly in her mind. "It's not just your son that is marked. You too have been marked, and your punishment will be far worse than your son. Your pride and arrogance caused it all. If I stay here any longer, it will know that I've seen it, and it might mark me too," she said as she turned to the door and bolted out, leaving Nonye and her son in their predicament. Nonye stood alone in the silence of her home, her ears ringing with the last words of the fleeing prophetess. "You are marked, and your punishment will be far worse than his." Her knees buckled beneath her as she collapsed beside her son's bed, wondering what her punishment would be. She looked at her son and began to regret all the times that she let him get away with his wickedness, all the warnings she silenced, and all the tears she ignored. That night, the torment began. Nonye felt her bones grow weak. She collapsed to the bed, unable to move as her body began to decay. Nonye was alive and conscious, trapped in her own decaying body, unable to move or scream. Her mind remained sharp, while she experienced the slow rotting of her flesh day by day. She watched helplessly as her son lay there unconscious. Nonye began to pray to God to save her. For days she lay there helpless, hoping that one of her neighbors would come around to look for her. But Nonye knew better than to make such wishes. After all the terror that she had unleashed on the neighbors, she had no one left to turn to. No one would even dare to enter her house. No one would even dare to knock. So she rotted alone for days, praying to God to save her life and that of her son. Then the knock came, a slow, persistent knock on the door that kept going until it finally stopped. Nonye tried so hard to respond, but her lips could not move, as all she could do was cry. Nonye had never felt this helpless in her life. She lay in her own field, her eyes locked on the ceiling as the knocking finally ceased. Silence returned, heavier than before, and then came the sound of footsteps in the house. Nonye's eyes widened with horror. The front door had never opened, yet she could hear the footsteps clearly. Someone or something was inside the house, and Nonye could not help but cringe in terror. She lay there, unsure of what to expect, when she heard a voice call out for her. "Inspector Nonye," the voice said as Nonye leapt for joy, knowing that someone had finally come in search of her. The footsteps came closer, and Nonye, from the corner of her eyes, caught sight of Pastor Chuka, the same pastor who she had insulted and humiliated on the day that her son stole from the church. Pastor Chuka stood there, holding a Bible in his hand. His white robe flowed behind him, as if blown by an unseen breeze. Behind him stood 3 elders from the church, each holding anointing oil in their hands. Tears streamed down Nonye's cheeks, knowing that Pastor Chuka was the last person she was expecting to see. How could he be here? Why would he come? She said to herself as he stepped closer, unbothered by the stench that had filled the room. "I saw you in my dream 3 nights ago," Pastor Chuka said calmly. "You were lying here and your son, was no longer your son. He looked at Nonso's swollen body. There is something ancient in this house, he continued, something that entered through the sin of theft and was rooted by pride. Pastor Chuka turned to the others and nodded. We must begin, he said, as the church elders lit their candles. The room trembled as the evil presence in the room began to hiss. Pastor Chuka opened his Bible and began to pray, his voice steady and commanding. As the scriptures flowed from his lips, the curtains fluttered violently as the lights began to flicker. A loud inhuman sound erupted from Nonso's body as Nonso's eyes snapped open. The evil had taken over his body, screaming and yelling angrily at the pastors, a scream that did not belong to a boy. Pastor Chuka did not flinch. He poured anointing oil on Nonso's forehead and began to pray fervently. Suddenly, the bed began to shake as the mirror on the wall exploded. From the shadows, a form began to rise. This was the evil woman from the bag. She hovered above the ground, eyes glowing as her head continued to bleed. "You will not take them," she growled angrily as Pastor Chuka faced her with a fearless spirit. "You were not buried in peace, but you will rest today," he said as he held out a small white handkerchief that had been prayed upon for 3 days. "Return to the pit from where you came," he said as he pressed the cloth against Nonso's chest, and with a deafening scream, the evil woman vanished into black smoke. The candles in the room went out as the room grew silent. Nonso collapsed, his body limp but no longer swollen. Nonye blinked as her fingers began to twitch. She could now move, and her skin had now been restored. "I can speak now," she said happily as tears poured down her eyes. Pastor Chuka turned to her to reveal that the spirit did not just torment her, it fed in her guilt, and that was why it had a strong hold on them. Pastor Chuka then anointed her forehead with oil, declaring that she would leave if only she lived a changed life. Nonye promised to change her ways. With tears pouring down her face, she fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. "I was blinded by pride," she cried. "I thought I was protecting my son. What I did not know was that I was destroying him." Pastor Chuka placed a hand on her shoulder, revealing that mercy exists even after judgment. However, he warned Nonye never to go back to who she was, not as a mother, not as a woman, not as a soul. The elders then gathered around them and raised a chorus of thanksgiving and worship. A peace deep and pure began to settle in the house. For the first time in a very long time, the air felt clean and peaceful. Nonye and her son Nonso paid a visit to the church a week later. Nonso stood beside his mother at the altar of the same church where it all began. Gone was his arrogance and pride. Nonso looked like a boy who had seen the edge of death and had returned with a story he could barely speak about. Nonye stepped forward and held the microphone. She faced the entire church, her voice shaking as she began to speak. "I came here weeks ago, not as a mother, but as a warning. I was proud, arrogant. I let the fear of man become my law, and I let my son become a monster in my name." She paused, looked at her son and continued, "But God gave us another chance, through the very people I mocked, through the very pastor I insulted, and today I kneel before you to ask for your forgiveness." The entire church stood still as they looked at her compassionately. Then Mama Chinyere, the widow whose money Nonso stole, stood up. She walked slowly to the altar and hugged Nonye. "I forgive you, and I'm glad that you have decided to do the right thing." The entire church stood in applause as Pastor Chuka wiped a tear from his eye and stepped forward. "Let it be known," he said, "that evil may come for a night, but when the heart repents, God fights for the broken." Nonso learned his bitter lesson, never to steal again. He began to take steps towards making things right. The next day, Nonso went to Mama Chinyere's house, this time not to sneak in through her window, but to knock on her door with his head bowed low. She opened it and froze, surprised to see him standing there with an envelope in his hand. "I saved up some money," Nonso said softly. "It's not everything I took, but I'll keep working until I pay it all back." Mama Chinyere stared at him, her lips trembling not from anger, but from relief. She took the envelope slowly, then reached out and pulled Nonso into a hug. "I've already forgiven you, my son," she whispered as she thanked him. From that day forward, Nonso became a different boy. He returned every item he had ever stolen, even the smallest things: pencils, handkerchiefs, toys. If he couldn't find the owner, he dropped it in the church offering box. He became known not for his quick fingers, but for his humble spirit. And each time someone asked why he had changed, he would look down and say, "I died once, but God brought me back." The lesson to be learned from this story is that whatever goes around comes around. Learn to be kind to others and treat them the way you would like to be treated. Do not let greed lead you into doing things that you would regret. Parents, learn to caution your children when they do wrong. Do not defend evil in the name of love, because true love disciplines, true love corrects. What you ignore today in the name of protection could grow into the very thing that destroys your child tomorrow. And to the youth, remember this: every action has consequences. No one escapes the harvest of their seed. It may not come today or tomorrow, but it will surely come. But above all, when mercy finds you, grab it. When life gives you another chance, use it. When the hand of God pulls you back from destruction, do not return to the fire, because not everyone who sees the grave gets to come back and tell the story. I hope you enjoyed the story.